Previously, we covered the core foundations. Now, in part 3, we tackle Mars, surface geology. Mars. Episode 3, surface geology. Last time, we looked at Mars from the outside, its orbit, its moons, and the basic physical character of the planet. Today, we go to the surface itself. Here is the question this episode is built around. What does the geology of Mars actually tell us? And why does it matter more now than at any point in human history? That second part is worth dwelling on. Right now, multiple space agencies and private operators are actively planning crewed missions to Mars. The surface geology isn't just academic. It determines where you land, where you look for resources, and whether there was ever anywhere on this planet that life could have taken hold. That's what we're here to work through. Mars sits at an average distance of roughly 228 million kilometers from the Sun. It's about half the diameter of Earth, with a surface gravity just over a third of what we experience here. Being smaller, it lost internal heat faster than Earth did. That single fact has shaped almost everything about the surface we see today. On Earth, plate tectonics continuously reshapes the crust. Old rock gets dragged down, new rock wells up, and the surface is in a constant state of slow renewal. Mars doesn't work that way. The crust appears to be one rigid shell, with no evidence of active plate tectonics in the modern era. The geological record on Mars is therefore ancient in a way that Earth simply isn't. Features that formed billions of years ago are still sitting there, largely intact, waiting to be read. That's both a challenge and an extraordinary opportunity. And it leads directly to the first major thing we need to understand about this surface. The geological history of Mars is divided into 3 broad periods, and understanding them is the key to understanding everything else. The earliest is called the Noachian. It ran from roughly 4.5 billion years ago to about 3.7 billion years ago. During this era, Mars was being hammered by asteroid and comet impacts, the same late heavy bombardment that scarred the Moon and the early Earth. The southern highlands, that heavily cratered ancient terrain covering much of the southern hemisphere, date primarily from this period. But here's what makes the Noachian remarkable. There's strong mineralogical evidence that liquid water was present on the surface, or very close to it, during this era. Phyllosilicate minerals, clays, have been identified from orbit across large parts of the southern highlands. Clays form in the presence of liquid water. You can't get around that chemistry. So the oldest, most battered terrain on Mars is also the terrain that carries the clearest signature of a wetter past. That's not a coincidence, and we'll come back to what it means. The second period is called the Hesperian, running from roughly 3.7 billion years ago to about 3 billion years ago. This is when Mars was transitioning. Volcanic activity was still intense. Massive outflow channels formed, not from gentle rainfall or slow river erosion, but from catastrophic floods, possibly triggered when volcanic heat melted ice locked in the crust. The mineralogy shifts during this period too. Sulfate minerals start to appear, which form in more acidic, less hospitable water conditions. Mars was changing, and not in a direction that was becoming more welcoming. The third period, the Amazonian, covers everything from roughly 3 billion years ago to the present day. This is the cold, dry, geologically quieter Mars we think of today. Volcanic activity continued, but became sporadic and localized. Ice played an increasingly dominant role in shaping the landscape, and the surface became progressively more oxidized. That distinctive red-orange color comes from iron oxide, essentially rust, that has worked its way into the dust and regolith across the planet. Each of these periods left a different fingerprint on the surface. Reading those fingerprints is exactly what the current generation of Mars missions has been designed to do. Now let's talk about the specific features that make Martian geology so striking, because some of them are genuinely unlike anything else in the inner solar system. Start with Olympus Mons. It's a shield volcano sitting on the Tharsis Plateau in the Western Hemisphere, and it's the largest volcano in the solar system by volume. It stands roughly 22 kilometers above the Martian datum, the equivalent of mean sea level on Mars, and spreads across an area roughly the size of France. If you were standing at the base of Olympus Mons, the summit would be over the horizon. The volcano is so wide and so gently sloped that the curvature of the planet itself would hide it from you. Why does Mars have a volcano this large? It comes back to the absence of plate tectonics. On Earth, a tectonic plate moving over a hotspot produces a chain of volcanoes, the Hawaiian island chain being the obvious example. The plate keeps moving, so the hotspot punches through in a new location, building a new volcano each time. On Mars, the crust sits stationary over the hotspot for billions of years, and all that volcanic material stacks up in one place. Olympus Mons is the result of several billion years of eruptions onto the same patch of ground. The Tharsis Plateau it sits on is itself enormous, a vast volcanic upland whose sheer mass is thought to have stressed the crust so severely that it contributed to the formation of Valles Marineris, which brings us to the next feature. Valles Marineris is often described as a canyon system, which is technically accurate but somewhat undersells it. It stretches roughly 4,000 kilometers across the face of Mars, runs up to 7 kilometers deep in places, and spans widths of up to 200 kilometers at its broadest. The entire Grand Canyon of Arizona would fit comfortably inside a single side branch. It didn't form the way the Grand Canyon did. The Grand Canyon was carved by water over millions of years. Valles Marineris form primarily through tectonics, the crust of Mars pulling apart and collapsing inward along a series of fault lines. Some sections may have been enlarged by wind erosion or ancient water activity, but the main structure is a rift system, a crack in the planetary crust. The walls of Valles Marineris expose an extraordinary cross-section of Martian geological history. Layer upon layer of ancient rock, some of it dating back to the Noachian, with orbital spectrometers detecting sulfates, clays, and iron oxides that together paint a picture of changing environmental conditions over billions of years. There's an open question here that scientists are still working through. Were there ever standing bodies of water within parts of Valles Marineris? Some sections show layered deposits consistent with lacustrine sedimentation, lakebed material. The debate isn't settled. From an astrobiological perspective, that matters enormously, because lakes within a geologically complex system like this would have been prime candidates for preserved biological material if Mars ever hosted life. The northern lowlands present a very different picture from the ancient southern highlands. They're flatter, younger, and sit at a significantly lower elevation. There's a clear hemispheric dichotomy on Mars. The southern highlands are old, heavily cratered, and elevated. The northern lowlands are relatively smooth, geologically younger, and lie up to several kilometers lower. Why this dichotomy exists is one of the most debated questions in Mars science. Some researchers have proposed that the northern lowlands are the remnant of a giant impact basin from very early in Mars's history, possibly the largest impact structure in the solar system. Now so ancient and eroded, it no longer looks like a crater. Others argue it reflects differences in early crustal formation. The evidence isn't conclusive either way. Less disputed is the possibility that the northern lowlands may once have held a large body of water. The term Northern Ocean gets used, though it carries more certainty than the evidence strictly supports. It's convenient shorthand rather than an established fact. What the data does show is that the northern lowlands have shoreline-like features at consistent elevations in some areas, along with minerals consistent with water interaction. Whether this represents a persistent ocean, episodic flooding, or something else is still being actively researched. If large volumes of water once pooled in the north and then retreated, through freezing, through escape to space, through infiltration into the crust, the question of where it went connects directly to what Mars looks like underground. That's where we're heading next. Let's bring this around to the present day, and to the spacecraft actively working on the Martian surface right now. NASA's Curiosity rover has been exploring Gale Crater since August 6, 2012. Gale was chosen specifically because its central mound, Mount Sharp, exposes billions of years of layered Martian rock. Curiosity has been climbing that mound, reading the geological record like pages of a book. It has confirmed the presence of ancient habitable environments, not confirmed life, and that distinction matters, but conditions that could have supported microbial life, including neutral pH water, chemical energy sources, and the right mineral chemistry. Perseverance landed in Jezero Crater on February 18, 2021. Jezero is a former lake basin with a preserved river delta, a fan of sediment deposited where an ancient river flowed into standing water. Perseverance has been collecting core samples cached for eventual return to Earth. That Mars sample return mission is currently facing significant funding challenges, but if it proceeds, it would allow geochemists and astrobiologists to analyze Martian rock with the full power of Earth-based laboratory equipment. No rover instrument comes close to what's possible in a proper lab. The InSight lander operated from November 26, 2018 until December 21, 2022, giving us our first detailed seismic picture of the Martian interior. It detected Marsquakes, and from the way seismic waves traveled through the planet, scientists were able to constrain the size and nature of Mars's core, crust, and mantle. Those findings directly inform how we interpret the surface geology, because the planet's internal structure drove the volcanic and tectonic history that produced the landscape we see today. CNSA's Zhurong rover, which landed in May 2021, explored the Utopia Planitia region of the northern lowlands, and returned data consistent with layered subsurface structures that may reflect ancient ice or sediment deposits. All of this work is converging on a clearer picture, but it's also raising new questions at every turn. Here is what the surface geology of Mars, taken as a whole, is telling us. Early in its history, Mars had conditions that were more complex, more dynamic, and arguably more hospitable than anything on its surface today. There was liquid water, volcanic heat, and considerable chemical diversity. That's no longer a controversial statement. The mineralogical evidence is solid. What we don't know is how long those conditions lasted, how widespread they were, or whether they persisted long enough and stayed stable enough to permit the emergence of life. The Noachian era lasted several 100 million years. On Earth, evidence suggests life emerged within the first few 100 million years of the planet's history, though the exact timing is still debated. The timescales aren't obviously incompatible, but Mars then underwent a profound environmental transition. The magnetic field weakened. We'll look at why in the next episode. The atmosphere thinned, surface water disappeared, and the planet became the cold, oxidizing, radiation-exposed environment it is today. Whatever geological record of any early biology existed at the surface has since been subjected to billions of years of UV. That is part 3 of Mars. In part 4, we explore the next key question. Subscribe so you do not miss it.